Dawntail told a very beautiful story, and this is my love letter to it. I don't know if I'm just getting more sappy and sentimental now that I'm 28 and my Saturn has returned, but I've played this game since about 2.5, and this is the first expansion that just really hit me on a deeper level, and I want to make this video to kind of just express how I feel about it and hopefully start some discussion with other people. And the last time I did this type of video for Genshin Impact, it was received quite well, and I hope that some people can hear me out on some things that I really enjoyed about the main story quest of Dawntrail. I'm the type of person, when I'm listening to a story, even if tropes are familiar or if things feel a little bit samey, I really enjoy thinking about where the writers were, the deeper concepts, the source material, and the themes that they want to explore. And there were loosely about 3 themes that I wanted to dig into in this video. The first and most obvious thing that I noticed about Dawntrail was they were exploring the concept of family, what family is, how to find your family, and who you owe sort of familial relations to. Pretty much every principal character in this story had an arc that explored their family. I think the easiest way to sort of discuss the family is to just go through each of the main characters, starting with Wuk Lamat. Her story felt a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, maybe a little bit more predictable, but I think that is her character in general, is that she wasn't necessarily exploring who her family was. She had a really strong idea of who her family was. Pretty much everybody calls her Lama Chi, which means sister, and you quite quickly, as the Warrior of Light, as well as some of the retired scions who get to know her, start quickly calling her Lama Chi. I think that this is done on purpose. I think when you dig a little bit deeper into this, I think this represents the fact that she is the sister to everyone. You see, like, quite quickly, people warm up to her really well, which exemplifies the fact that she is supposed to be a leader. She very much rests in that position quite well. She doesn't domineer anybody. She doesn't lead anybody. She stands beside you. She wants to learn who you are and what you need so she can take the role of leadership and bear that burden for you. And I think that it's so interesting that the first character to really accept her as a sister and take it seriously is Koana, who is the person who leads beside her by the time they have their ascension. Speaking of Koana, I don't necessarily really like the sort of nerdy boy trope, like this cold, calculated, to himself type of trope. You see that a lot in JRPGs, and it's kind of played out. I think Koana had a pretty intense flip to his character that made me really like him, and it starts showing. That's when he started becoming very protective over his sister. That's when I started noticing the symbolism of the brother sister thing between them, in that everyone calls her Lama Chi, but Koana is kind of the one character to take it seriously. It's more than just a term of endearment. He takes it quite seriously. In general, I think Koana exists as a very good accessory character. I don't think that his character was meant to have anything more advanced than what you saw. He does have a big opportunity to be explored in the post story patches, so I'll just leave it at that. Like, maybe we'll get more, maybe we won't. Gulool Ja Ja sort of initiates the most compelling family story that I saw in this game. Not only does he initiate the Dawn Trial and initiates what I consider the first act of the game, which is starting the Dawn Trial up into Wuk Lamat's ascension, he has a lot of different familial ties. He is the patriarch, after all, of all of these characters. What I thought was interesting was they played his fatherliness quite well, but his fatherliness was so objective that he even looked past possible biases that he could have had towards Zarool Ja. And Zarool Ja is kind of what I want to dig into. I'll be so real, I don't know if this was spoiled. The way that I like to enjoy video games, which is probably why I'm gushing so much about this game, is that I don't look at spoilers. I look at the initial trailer. For Final Fantasy XIV, I looked at each of the trailers as they released them for FanFest, and I do look at live letters and stuff, but I mostly, for games outside of Final Fantasy XIV, and even within Final Fantasy 14, I try my hardest to not really look at a lot of supplementary content. If I like the game and I trust my purchase, I'm just gonna dive into it and take the leap, you know? And that normally makes me experience games in a very fresh way. I mean, I was talking about earlier how my Saturn has returned. I'm really trying to return to enjoying video games the way that I used to when I was a kid. I mean, that's what made me fall in love with games. And back then, I did not have such easy access to the internet. I did not field a lot of different opinions for games. I kind of just picked one up if my grandparents had enough money to get me one, and I just had fun with it. And that's how I've been trying to enjoy games lately. So with all that being said, Zarool Ja hit me from left field. There were so many moments of Zarool Ja that was such good storytelling to me. From first glance, you think that Zarool Ja, at least I thought that Zarool Ja would be stoic, stubborn, but eventually convinced. I thought that Gulool Ja Ja would be taking his spot as the antagonist by the end of the game. They really played with my expectations in that. What I thought was so interesting was that Zarool Ja was the one character that had blood relation to Gulool Ja Ja. However, he had the biggest identity crisis. See, Gulool Ja Ja didn't really have any relation and did not claim any relation to this sort of family, but he had an identity that he stuck by, and that drove him. Wuk Lamat accepted her station as the sister. Koana accepted his station as the brother. Yet Zarool Ja, throughout the entire story, is bubbling with an identity crisis. He wants to dominate, he wants to exceed, he wants to show everybody that he is meant to be king because he doesn't believe it himself. But what's crazy is, he's the one character that is actually blood related to Gulool Ja Ja. If you wanted to split the hairs and go into technicalities, he is the one who deserves the throne. So throughout the entire time, the choices that he makes out of his insecurities become more and more crazy. Hi there, Editor Me here. As I'm doing this video, I realized that in this image that I've created, you can also tell that Wuk Lamat and Koana sort of have their own sort of yin and yang, someone to lean on. Zarool Ja kind of sits alone because even Gulool Ja Ja, technically they're brothers. They both sort of have someone else to vibe with, so that even goes further as like a sort of physical manifestation of how isolated Zarool Ja is. And this is the first Final Fantasy XIV character that I genuinely felt like emotional over in some moments. I mean, there's other characters that I felt emotional over, but this is the first character that played the villain in ways that actually made me like, ooh, I want to get to him, or ooh, I gotta stop him. The way that he would betray people who were loyal to him, people who he could have called his family, but he did not claim them. He did not acknowledge them. He was blinded by his own insecurities that people who could have been his family were just tossed to the side or even eliminated. You see, and like there's just this constant weaving of like found family. And the major weakness of Zarool Ja is that he does not believe that anybody should be within his community and anybody should call him his brother. He just wants to be alone, and that is his one weakness compared to all of the other characters. All the other characters are calling each other brother and sister. Even Gulool Ja Ja, who is the first antagonist in the first act and eventually sort of finds his way into redeeming himself, eventually becomes almost like a brother to us. And even in the end, when Wuk Lamat has to face defeating Zarool Ja, she wants to disown him, but she can't because her whole purpose is to be everyone's sister. So like, she has to come to terms with the fact that some of her family is not going to be who they need to be, or some of her family is going to be toxic. And what really drove home all of this like metaphor that I was seeing was the fact that his blood-related son is called Gulool Ja. If it wasn't gonna be obvious before, it is now obvious now. If anything, he has the closest affinity by blood to the throne, yet doesn't feel as though he deserves it and lashes out to everything around him for it. And he has a son that is now named Gulool Ja, who he rejects. So he has all these people who are not his blood relation who want to be his family, but he will not accept them because they will not acknowledge him in the way that he wants to be acknowledged, whatever that may be. And he also has blood relation that he rejects. He just chooses to be alone, and that is his character flaw. I thought that that was so interesting because as somebody who is quite reserved and somebody who does not keep a close circle of people, it was a good reminder to me about how sometimes ugly isolation can be, and how weak isolation can be. How even though opening up to people about your insecurities and about maybe some things that you kind of want to hide, because throughout his story he is hiding a lot of things. You don't really get to see his true intentions until the Dawn trial, until the trial where they're doing the cooking, where he kind of just like looks at Wuk Lamat and something is bubbling over. How choosing to be isolated and not accepting support, not accepting humility from the people around you who love you, it can be your detriment. I'm not saying that in doing this they're telling a story that is like boundary breaking or anything like that, but I do think that it was really cleverly done and it was really fun to explore, and I honestly did not expect it. The next person I want to talk about is Krile. Krile had a pretty quick family arc, but it needed a lot of exposition in order for its weight to be understood. By the time we got to Krile's family arc, at least me, I had already come to an understanding that we were exploring familial themes, right? And what I find interesting with Krile is that, much like Gulool Ja Ja to Zarool Ja, Krile almost has an accountability and something that she's inherited from her family. Krile is the product of the preservation. I never really felt that Krile had a strong sense of purpose and maybe taking accountability for what her parents had invented. In many ways, it was nobody's fault. Krile almost represents how, in many ways, you can carry what your predecessors have done and have felt and have made, even if you don't even know who they are. Me being a very mixed person, I have a lot of heritage that spans across a lot of different countries and hemispheres, and one of the things that I related to with Krile was, say for example, I'm half Korean and my grandmother immigrated to America, and in many ways I don't know a lot about my Korean heritage before her, just the things that I've been able to glean from her, right? I found it really touching that they explored a character who did not know where she came from and held so resolute and like so put together that you did not really realize how much it affected her until her parents were right in front of her. I was so happy to see Krile be able to come to terms with it and get some of the answers that she wanted. But the most touching part was how her and her family, when they saw each other for the first time, they really wanted to bond. There was love there, but they grew up so different from each other that they didn't know each other as a person. Generally, I thought that Krile was a pretty clever character as well, because I feel like she was supposed to represent how there is a bond with blood that you can feel. And regardless of if that is love, if that's contention, if it's controversial, if it's anything, it's still there and it's still a part of your identity that a lot of us have to come to terms with. Whether you know your parents, whether you know your family, whether you don't know them. And it kind of compares really interestingly to Zarool Ja, because Zarool Ja knows where he comes from. He knows what he might be entitled to, or what he might have a path towards because of his family, but there feels like there's no love there. And it only made Krile's moment feel even more impactful because of it. Now, Sphene is obviously a foil to Wuk Lamat. Sphene represents how, in my opinion, how you can love something too much almost. Maybe that's not a sophisticated way of saying it, but her and Wuk Lamat definitely understand each other because they have sworn to each other that they're going to do everything they can for their people. Them and their people constantly say that they love each other, which is something I'm going to get into later on. But what I think is interesting about Sphene is that she kind of becomes this lesson to Wuk Lamat in that you can love someone, but you can't be a people pleaser, for a lack of better words. You have to be able to set boundaries, and you also have to know how to love someone by letting them go. I think Sphene, being the queen next to Zarool Ja, also helps to drive that home. How Wuk Lamat is struggling with having to learn how to let go of her brother while still loving him, while still understanding that he's her brother and she can't disown him per se, but she has to learn how to let him go, because if she doesn't let him go, she's going to become like Sphene. Sphene is disembodied by the time you get to know her entire character. She doesn't even exist anymore because she's given so much of herself that she's just become this like yes man to her entire civilization. And it's really, really tragic because she loves her people so much. Her people did not deserve their fate, but in an effort to preserve everything and to keep everything happy and to carry every single weight, even if it's impossible, she literally doesn't even register as a human anymore, because it's inhumane to expect that from somebody, but to also think that you are capable of doing that. Erenville probably had the most obvious resolution, and it was the most bittersweet one to me, because we knew that we had to eventually say goodbye to Kafkuya. And he was the one character throughout the entire arc that just would not do it. This game had such good storytelling to me. It absorbed me so much that I probably, of all the expansions, stopped and talked to as many NPCs as I could to get as much flavor text as I possibly could. And through the entire arc of Erenville and you and the Unlost World, the most telling part of his character was him staying silent the entire time that we were leading up to deleting Kafkuya. And what was so beautiful, which ties back into this sort of like love between all of these characters, this familial love between all these characters, is that even though Erenville could have come off as cold, and when you first get to know him, he does seem a little bit cold. And like in the 6.5 patch, Wuk Lamat's like, oh, that's just how he is. Because you're just now getting to know their relationship as kind of like siblings, because they do kind of feel like siblings. Oh, that's just how he is. As you get to know him more, you realize that there's a lot underneath that coldness. What's happening by the time you're in the Unlost World is Erenville is taking a long time to process this loss. Something that he kind of is putting off. Something that he's been avoiding. Something that I think he's always known is the truth. But he's busied himself with being away from his family, with trying to find things to do, with trying to impress them. There's a lot of people who walk this path of they want to do well by their family, and the only way they can do that is to find something tangible to do. So he becomes a gleaner. He tries to find the Golden City, all these things. And by the time he can finally tell Kafkuya, oop, I'm getting inactivity. By the time he can finally tell Kafkuya, hey mother, I did everything that I was supposed to do, are you proud of me? She's technically already gone. And it's a reminder that you need to talk to your family. The whole time I was like, Erenville, you have to say goodbye to your mom. Like in my head, I'm like, you have to say goodbye to your mom, dude. This is your only chance to do it. And it was so sad. But what I found so beautiful was Wuk Lamat and the others hadn't understood him enough to know to give him space. They were like not mad at him. They were just like, he's going through it. He's going through it. Our brother is going through it. I know him like a brother, and he's going through it. The next thing that I want to talk about, now that I've talked about all the characters and my opinions on them and just the impressions that they gave me, is one thing that made me realize how personal of an experience this was. I don't know, it felt cosmic. I played this game since about 2.5, and this is the first story that really made me stop and take a breath and realize something about myself. And that is that I have a bad relationship with leadership. In many ways, I don't like the trope of having somebody like Wuk Lamat be loved because they're just that person, because they were born into it, but because they're the princess, because they're the prince. It took a few of the trials for me to realize, like, the reason why I'm having issues with this is because I don't believe that it's realistic for a leader to exist. Does that sound crazy? Maybe that sounds crazy, and you guys can call me crazy if you think that sounds crazy. But by the end of the first act, up until the ascension, that's what I consider the first act, the ascension of Wuk Lamat and Koana into becoming the Dawn Servants. I found it so interesting to see the image of a leader saying to their people, I love you. I am your sister, and I'm going to do everything I can as your leader to understand you and find out how we can all make this work and live in peace. That's my job as the leader, as the person who gets to sit on the throne and reap the benefits of everybody's labor and reap the benefits of everyone's support. I'm going to do everything I can to pay that forward to you. And that felt like a fantasy to me. And it made me realize that I don't necessarily have a problem with leadership. I have a problem with my experiences in leadership. I did not realize how much residual resentment I was holding towards forms of leadership until I saw how beautiful it could be. How it's not actually weakness and it's not actually embarrassing to see somebody who supports you and wants to lead you and you say, yes, I will follow you. And this is kind of weird because I didn't really realize until I started recording this just now how much I'm kind of like thinking about just like my experiences so far because of this expansion. But I think that's good. I think that's good storytelling. I think that's what storytelling is supposed to do, is make you reflect on things. I didn't realize how much I was considering myself a weaker person for believing in somebody. You know, it made me feel like I was being naive to believe in someone. Somebody's telling me like, hey, I want to represent you, and you're like, I gotta be defensive about it. I can't trust them. Seeing so many people trust Wuk Lamat really opened my eyes to how beautiful that dynamic can be if it's allowed to be, if we enable people to be that way. Now, I'm not saying that that's possible maybe in reality, and I'm not saying that I know how to make that a reality, but I did think that that was a really beautiful perspective, and it kind of gives me a little bit of hope. It gives me hope in humanity, it gives me hope in society and what it can be. Tuliyollal is a gorgeous place, and it's gorgeous because it's the product of so many different people coming together and finding common ground and celebrating each other. And through Wuk Lamat admitting that she doesn't know these many people, and like that's another thing that kind of got me, was like she admitted, oh my God, I'm sitting here becoming a leader. I want to be a leader, but I've never taken the time to leave my castle and get to know these people. I thought that that idea was something so refreshing and nice for me as a form of escapism to see. My favorite part of the trials was probably the food trial. Personally, food is my love language. I love food, and I thought that when you want to get to know somebody, if they come from a very different walk of life from you, you really can get to know them quite well based off of what they eat. I wasn't really as thorough with like delving into this story until that point. Like obviously I'm like paying attention to the cutscenes, I'm reading some NPC stuff here and there, but I wasn't as obsessed with absorbing as much information as I possibly could until that one, because I thought that that was such a clever perspective to have on culture and learning about culture. The final thing I wanted to talk about is going to get a little bit woo-woo, a little bit harebrained, but The only real like sci-fi and fantasy writing that I get mostly exposed to is via video games. The only books and sort of essays and information that I like to listen to or read is a little bit more technical. I like reading and listening to things that are more like behavioral, psychological, in anthropology, things like that. But one of the themes that I've been noticing, I think a little bit lately in video game writing, is our relationship with technology. And I think this wasn't as heavy handed in this game. Well, maybe it was. I mean, look at the environment that we're in right now. I feel like Solution 9 is symbolic of the internet and technology and our obsession with permanence. Obviously, Solution 9 is supposed to completely contrast to Tuliyollal. You have Tuliyollal that is technologically not as advanced, but still feels utopian in its cohesion. And you have Solution 9 that feels utopian in its technology, but dystopian in its cohesion. Throughout the understanding of the endless and things like that, there is a huge obsession within this society with permanence. Nobody wants to feel harm. Nobody wants to go too soon. Sphene doesn't want her people to suffer to the point where they sustain as much dopamine and joy as they possibly can. I feel as though the symbolism has even more ethos when you acknowledge that everyone's memories go to the cloud. This is not all a bad thing. I feel like a lot of us when we were there really loved it. Like when I went to Solution 9, I wanted to go shopping. I wanted to get to know everybody. I wanted to like see what was there because it felt like they were doing new things. There was such novelty to it. But there was this undertone of like sadness and being disconnected. What really resonated with me with it all was the obsession with permanence. Everyone wants to be the same, even to the point where Sphene is just accepted as looking eternally youthful because she exists in this almost digital space where everybody looks, feels, and acts perfect. They don't care that they forget about their family. They don't care that they lose parts of their identity, as long as everything feels and looks good. I also think that Solution 9 represents consumption, the dangers of it. Because like I said, I always want to return to the fact that Solution 9 in many ways has utopian aspects. This is such a cool area to be in. But when it goes off the rails, when it goes unchecked, they're so obsessed with keeping everything permanent and they're so obsessed with sustaining an unsustainable lifestyle that they look past the ethics of going and consuming and destroying another shard. You know, it comes to a point almost every single time when they have to talk about like Levin sickness, the electrope becoming so strong that some people are just born to being sick because they can't handle it. They just kind of like, oh, it's just a thing that we do. And when Sphene is questioned on whether or not it's good to go and subject another shard to the same fate that she had to suffer, it doesn't matter to her. It comes off as very selfish. And frankly, it was evil and antagonistic. I'm explaining all of this because I find it interesting that writers and artists in Square Enix, in this division to create this expansion, came together to talk about this theme. Because at the beginning of this video, I was talking about how I'm very interested in what encourages and motivates people to write from a certain perspective. I don't feel like at a certain point, regardless of where the artist exists, whether it's in a corporate setting or if they're just doing it as a hobby, their job is to create something authentically. That's what creates good stories. That's what creates good art. And I find it interesting to know that writers and artists came together to tell a story and a perspective about some of the darkness of hyperconsumption and an over-reliance on technology as people who work in the tech industry. If you think about it, the obsession with permanence in Solution 9 can be seen in our everyday life. We want to document every single thing. We want to put everything on the cloud. We don't want to lose things. We don't want to feel as though we're missing out because we see all of these things on the internet that's telling us that we have to be involved with it. Our hyperconsumption is actively right now absorbing and destroying other people that kind of exist outside of our bubble. I mean, look at the fast fashion industry. Look at the industries that are making our phones and our technology. They are actively destroying other parts of the world. And it's not all bad. It has enabled us to live a comfortable life. And we've made leaps and bounds in technology and comfortability. I mean, medicine has come so far. Luxury has come so far and become so accessible. But at what cost? I think that they didn't want to necessarily give like a socio-political commentary, but it is a huge presence in our life that, much like the people of Solution 9, we kind of just smile and don't think about it. One more thing I put on my notes that I forgot to mention was I love that the Unlost World was the most ham-fisted way of proving this feeling that I had, which was that you are greeted with what is essentially a digital heaven, and each of the characters are processing having to accept loss themselves, and you as the player are forced to explore it. And then at the end of each zone of the map, when you get to the terminal, you are told that once you turn off the terminal, this part of the map will no longer be accessible to you in the game. It's like, even if you didn't really resonate with the story, they still made you face the fact that you might not be entitled to having this digital space anymore. So those are all my thoughts. I know that maybe some of them are not as sophisticated and well put together, but like I said, I don't want this to be an absolutist type of opinion thing. I just want to encourage discussion on this game because I love this game, and I believe that if I'm being platformed by people who love games the same way that I do, and you guys want to like keep pushing like me on the algorithm, I believe that the more that we let ourselves be heard, the more that we can maybe encourage the people who make these games to feel more confident in exploring these types of things, because I really enjoyed this expansion. I'm just now starting to prog the extremes. I'm going to the experience points were just getting doled out so much that I had to stop doing the side quests by the time I got to around Heritage Found, but I'm going to go back and do those side quests because there's a lot of good lore in those side quests. And there's a lot of stuff that I could talk about too, other themes, but those are the 3 things that I wanted to talk about. So thank you guys so much for watching. Whatever you guys were doing when you were listening to this, I hope it was dailies, but if not, if you're like at work or at school, doing errands, whatever, I hope that it's going by super well. Thank you so much for giving me your time, and I hope whatever you're up to next goes by super well. Bye!